I want to talk tonight about why greatness in art, in spirituality, in justice, why greatness always requires confession. Not because it makes us less to confess, but because it makes us whole, bigger. There's a film that I revisited. I remember the impact it made on me years ago, but I revisited it a couple weeks ago, and it haunted me, and I've been thinking a lot about it since I saw it. I'm sure you've seen it or you know it. Whiplash? Yeah. Whiplash. For those who haven't seen it, it tells the story of a young drummer, a young jazz drummer named Andrew, who was obsessed with becoming one of the greats. And under the brutal tutelage of a teacher who will stop literally at nothing to produce and generate genius in Andrew, Andrew is willing to sacrifice everything. Friendship, love, health, joy, everything for the sake of perfection. It is a searing portrait of extremity. It leaves us with a hard question. Is it worth it? Is greatness worth the cost when it leaves us isolated and brittle and disconnected from the very things that make life good? And this week, reading our ancient wisdom, our weekly wisdom as the Torah turns, there's an unexpected parallel to be found in the personage of the Nazir, the Nazirite, a person who takes a vow, woman or man, of radical abstinence, no wine, no hair cutting, no contact with death. The Nazir is also reaching for greatness. Not in music, but in holiness. And yet when the period of abstinence ends, the Nazir, the Torah teaches us, has to bring 3 offerings, one of which is a sin offering. Why? Why would the Torah require an act of confession, an act of admittance, an act of accountability from someone who was just pursuing an elevated, holy path? The higher we climb, the deeper we must bow. We confess not to be less, but to be whole. We may not be Nazirim, we may not be jazz prodigies, but the temptation to extremes is with all of us. The parent trying to be too perfect, losing themselves in the process. An activist burning with righteous indignation and anger, but unable to see the person before them. The spiritual seeker who withdraws from joy or is suspicious of the body. The leader who becomes too proud to hear any dissent to certain questions, certainly not asking them of themselves. When does the pursuit start to eat away at our humanity? When does the desire to be better turn into a denial of our own limits and needs? The higher we climb, the deeper we must bow. We confess not to be less, but to be more whole. So why does the Nazir bring a sin offering? What's sin? The rabbis give us a layered interpretation of the sin itself. The confession, says Nachmanides, Ramban, is because the sin is in leaving the state of Nazirut, of leaving that holy state of holiness, that exalted state. For Nachmanides, Having tasted the angelic life, it is a spiritual diminishment to return to the world of wine and joy in the body. The sin is re-entry into the world. If you tasted the good life, you went on a weekend retreat, you did quadrinity. You've seen the light. You were on silent retreat somewhere, Vipassana, insight meditation. How dare you trade in that life of clarity and purpose to now re-enter the stream of everyday living, the banality. Siddhartha had it wrong. Should have stayed a sannyasin. Nachmanides holds out this ideal. Always strive to be perfect, even if it comes at a cost. And don't give up. It's a sin. There's another approach. Rabbi Lazar HaKapar and other rabbis in the Gemara say, no, the sin doesn't lie in leaving the abstinent life, but in choosing it from the get-go. The Torah wants us to embrace the world. The Gemara in the Yerushalmi and other places says that a person in the future will give a din v'cheshbon, an accounting of all of the good things that they saw that they were allowed and permitted to enjoy and didn't. That embrace of carnality, of embodied living, of somatic humanity says, oh, you want to be a Nazir? Great. But don't forget, that's not the ideal. Nachmanides, with all due deference to you, the real life is here, back in this world. An integrative spirituality, body and soul together, nice Montepulcianos and Barolos all around. That's the traditional understanding of the sin. The sin for leaving the perfect life or the sin for wanting it to begin with. But I want to offer two other options on why the Nazirite brings a sin offering, and it has nothing to do with whether or not it's a good thing to be a Nazirite or not. I think it's the most necessary one at this moment, each of these. I'd like to posit tonight that the Nazir brings a sin offering because they might think that they no longer need to acknowledge their vulnerabilities. That something about the pursuit of perfection makes the acknowledgement of imperfection seem anathema. There's something about striving to reach the top of the mountain that makes bowing low in humility very difficult to admit. I would argue that maybe at this point in human evolution, men have a little bit more of a problem with this than women, but who knows? Don't need to be gender essentialist about it. It seems to be quite human across the board. Perfection and the admittance of imperfection, the acknowledgement, the need to confess and take accountability is something that doesn't come easy. And so the Torah tells us, okay, you're a holy man, a holy woman for a month. During that time, do you think you were perfect? Really? Maybe you might think you were. After all, how bad could it be? How many sins could you commit sitting in a room meditating on the breath? How many sins can you commit when you're dedicated to social justice on campuses and everything you do is for the sake of the good of humanity? How many sins can you commit? And Torah says you might not remember them. And it's more than likely that the reason you don't is because you don't want to. There's an allergy to accountability. There's an allergy to being told that what you just did was hurtful to me. That how you used your power, how you used your presence in the world. And that can lead to a defensive reaction. Someone says to you, you know, I know that you're a Nazirite, but I know that you're going to become a famous jazz drummer that people will speak about forever, up there with the greats, but you're trampling on your relationship. The Torah comes along and says that in politics and in public discourse, in institutional life, when we cancel and we punish and we deny and we double down, all of that is an excuse of fear, of really confessing and owning, repairing and restoring. Our criminal justice system is structured by penalty, not restoration. There are people who would rather go to jail than to sit with the victims and stare in the face the impact of their sinfulness, of their criminality, how deeply ingrained it is, the shame of admitting that you acted in ways that maybe not intentionally but hurt others, that made an impact. Our own Rabbi Diane Koloresis wrote in something quite beautiful, the Torah insists on confession not as an act of shame, but as an act of radical honesty and humility. Without it, holiness curdles into hubris. The higher we climb, the deeper we must bow. We confess not to be less, but to be whole. And tonight I want to add one more layer to the sinfulness, quote unquote, of the Nazir. Often when we go through a period of abstinence or extreme self-reflection, we discover something remarkable. I'm not going to ask for hands here, but I'm just going to admit this myself. Why not? I'm talking about confession. I'll confess. Why not? We're in a church. Sometimes when we take the time out of our very busy schedules to stop and look, and often that comes with saying no, with making a boundary around something. It can look quite extreme. Some people, again, will take a weekend or a week or a month, a sabbatical. We discover in that space sometimes that we have been sinning for a long time, not necessarily against others, but against our own soul. Sometimes we realize, because of the space that we've created through a commitment, some period of abstinence or some period of space, that we must bring a sin offering for the lies that we've been giving to ourselves about who we are and who we're supposed to be and what's expected of us and how we should behave and how we should act and what we should say and how we should look, how we should spend our time. And maybe the Nazirite brings a sin offering because in this extreme moment of commitment, he recognizes not only his imperfection, but also his duplicity in the ways subtle and more grotesque that he became alien to himself. As Rav Kook writes so powerfully, Rav Avram Yitzchak Cohen Kook writes in Oros HaKodesh, in the Lights of Holiness, he writes that the first man sinned when he ate from the fruit and lied to himself and became other and alien, became zar, became exiled from himself and herself and themselves. And maybe the Nazir, in that extreme moment of being brought to the brink and says, no, I'm going to take a month, a year without wine and without contact with the death and without cutting my hair. I'm going to see myself for the first time in a long time and I'll say hi. And I'll wake up the next morning and confess and say that even someone as holy as me can live in a lie for a very long time. Deluding myself that I'm happy when I'm not. Deluding myself that I have everything I want when I don't. Maybe that's a new interpretation of the sin of the Nazirite. And Abba Zoy, as they'd say in Yiddish, if that's the case, then what a great sin. What a glorious moment that requires ometz and strength and courage and fortitude to not collapse, to stand in the truth of how my extreme behavior, as holy as I thought it was, injured other people, and I don't collapse, and I own it, and I stand in accountability. Or I realize, I've been so alien to myself now for a month, 10 years, and so I'm going to bring this offering of acknowledgement that the higher we climb, the deeper we must bow, and that we confess not to be less, but to be whole. Rabbi Rachel Barenblatt writes, "There is no perfection in this life, only the sincere striving to align the inner and the outer heart. And when they misalign, as they will, we must return, and return again." All of this teaches us that if we strive for greatness in leadership and in art and in justice and in spirituality, in parenting, in rabbiing, in humaning, we must first of all remember that accountability is not shameful, it is courageous. 2, that confession is not about shrinking, but about becoming bigger. And that restorative justice must be reclaimed in our communities and in our systems, the ability to stand in with accountability and with power. And lastly, which you might not see coming, but here it comes, now that I've told you. Joy is not optional. We must ultimately come back to the table, to the world, to wine, and to beauty, and to relationships. So Andrew, in Whiplash, he has to become brilliant, which he does, but he also becomes inhuman. And so he has to learn. The movie ends with the question, but the Torah offers an answer. Brilliance and genius without being human is not ideal. The higher you climb, the deeper you must bow. You must learn to confess, to be vulnerable, to be imperfect, in order to be whole. So we'll stand in a moment after the Aleinu and after the Mourner's Kaddish, and we'll drink wine. We'll make Kiddush, which means to make holy. And in that moment where we drink Kiddush wine, we are non-Nazarites, drinking grape juice. We enter Shabbat with the recognition that Judaism believes in integrative spirituality in the body, and in the body means you make mistakes and you break things. And Shabbat doesn't deny it. Shabbat wants you to eat. It wants you to connect. It wants us to be in a position of humility and to bow in earnestness, because we're at the highest moment of the week, so we have to bow the lowest. I want to bless this community. May we be a community that is brave enough to be accountable and to be confessional. Not to shrink, but to grow. Not to be less, but to be whole. And may every act of striving be matched with an equal act of humility. Because the higher we all go, the deeper we must bow. Amen.